this special bonus episode of Inside the Outside, I'm talking to Scott Buff. Scott is the owner of Terrapin Outfitters and was the organizer of my recent paddle trip in South Carolina. Scott had done legs of this trip before, but this was his first time being the trip organizer and also doing the trip in its entirety from start to finish. Scott did all of the legwork securing Children's Cancer Partners of the Carolinas as the charity for this event and making sure that we had portaging for our boats to get around the dam and even had a lake house for us to stay at the halfway point. I can't thank him enough for letting me join in on this trip. Without Scott's hard work and devotion, this trip never would have happened. As a veteran kayaker, Scott had his hands full teaching me how to be a kayaker. So in this conversation, we talk about all the lessons that he gave me on the trip, and he even shares a few of the lessons that he learned along the trip. We're still taking donations for Children's Cancer Partners of the Carolinas. Just text Paddle for Kids to 41444. That's the word paddle, the number 4, and kids, all in caps. 100% of all of this money generated goes directly to them. So I'm sitting here with Scott Buff, recapping this epic adventure that we went on. And Scott, I want to tell you, it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life, but it was also one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done in my life. So I really appreciate you letting me tag along on the trip.
Oh, no worries, man. We were glad to have you. And often in life, that is the way that it happens. In order to get a big reward, you must go through a big challenge.
Without a doubt, I earned every good time that I had.
Yeah, you did.
For me going into this, I was very inexperienced as far as any type of kayaking and, any distance trips that I've ever done have been on foot on the trail. So this was a totally new experience for me. But somebody like yourself, you've done a lot of paddling in your days, but this was the first time that you've got to do this trip from beginning to end. In the past, you've always participated, but not from beginning to end.
That's true. The first year we got pushed off by a 1,000-year flood, and we just skipped the whole part due to timing, the whole middle. Last year, I ended up with pneumonia. I think I started the trip with pneumonia, and by third day, it just took its hold on me, and I had to pull off and become trail angel. Then picked up on the last leg and completed that for the group because they had to go. And then this year, got to do the whole thing, and I'll have to say it was a lot more rewarding, like you say, than I thought. It's a nice paddle. It's not for the faint of heart. You got to dig in and go, but it is a lot of fun, and I would suggest everyone, if you can't do the whole trip, because it is a long trip, to at least try to get in on a leg with us and see some of the beautiful parts that South Carolina has to offer.
That was sort of my takeaway is anybody could do any one day of this trip. With the exception, now you mentioned you missed out on the middle that one time, and I'll tell you, if I had it to do over again, forget those lakes. Lake Moultrie can kiss my ass. I never want to paddle across that thing again.
Lake Moultrie has proven to be a brutal beast anytime you want to paddle across it. The winds blow you back where you came from. The swells pick up. There's no real easy way to get off since it's shaped like a big ball. It's just round. There's no finger to get off on, no shore to hug. You just go across the middle and hope the black clouds don't come over the tree line before you can reach the shore.
I hear you, man. That was one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my life. I believe that from a physical fitness, endurance kind of thing, that was the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life. It was an ass kicker.
It's a lot mental. If you focus on the fact that you're probably paddling the hardest you've ever paddled and only going maybe 1.5 miles an hour, and if you stop, you get pushed back a mile. If you focus on stuff like that, it's going to drain you, and your energy is going to be focused on your mentality. If you just look at the wake in front of you and see how you need to ride it out, before long, 1,000 wakes to go by, and hey, here you are done.
Exactly. So I'm curious. We both know and have discussed Lake Moultrie, it being tough. Outside of that, were there any parts of this that were particularly fun or, I'm not going to say easy because none of it was easy. Even on the easiest days, we put in a lot of miles. So it was just a different type of challenge. But was there any parts that really stood out to you?
There's the distance part of the leisure distance of the rivers. I mean, we put in a lot of miles on the rivers every day, averaging about 30 on a 9-hour paddle day. So, I mean, we're putting in a lot of miles. Actually, my favorite part as far as paddling was Lake Marion. It's just a long lake you get to go. and you kind of got to go because it's a long lake, and the winds again are always pushing you back upstream. But scenic wise, I'm going to have to say the bottom of Lake Marion, where we found the island we dubbed Africa Tick Island. That was, once you leave that and you get into the very bottom of the lake and going through the canal to Lake Moultrie. Oh man, that is just amazing.
Yeah, I got to say, the scenery around there, that was where we encountered a big majority of those cypress groves with all the Spanish moss in it. It felt otherworldly at times. You didn't feel like you were on just a typical lake. Where I'm from in West Virginia, we don't have cypress groves or anything. So I thought that was really cool.
And that's the joy of this trip. We start at the Rock Bottom River in Columbia, the Congaree, where it's all boulders. We put in right below that to a sandy mud bottom. We go through where Lake Wateree comes in, and it turns into the swamp of Santee, and then you just go through a wide open lake, and then you're back into the swampy low country, and you're back and enjoy that view, because right after that is that 14-mile trek across Moultrie.
Yeah.
So
there's nothing to see except whitecaps.
Exactly. So it's kind of surreal that you're out there in the middle of the water and you just barely see the top of the tree line, and we're going across it when we just left a place that you're navigating through trees. Moultrie is by far the hardest, but it is a straightforward go. My suggestion is anyone that wants to get in on this trip, the main thing we're going to need to learn is we got to listen to leadership in the harbor, unless you're used to harbor waters, because they will push you in a direction that you do not want to go.
Yeah, that's some big open water. It was reminiscent of Moultrie, except on such a huge scale. In addition to all of that big open water with these giant swells and winds coming at you, you've got ships the size of small cities, rolling around you. And that's no joke. It's nothing to take lightly. You really need to be organized. You need to communicate and stay together.
Fish that will swallow you whole is underneath us.
Yes.
And getting put into a bank isn't quite like on the freshwater with everything that grows on those rocks and attaches to it. It will rip you to pieces. Say the harbor is probably just the part that I would say you really got to buckle down and focus as an individual of, this isn't fun. We need to safely get across the harbor. We are the smallest things other than those birds on the water.
Yeah. You talked about how things on the bank could slice you apart. There was one point there, I kind of spun around so I could shoot some video of you guys paddling toward me, and these beautiful big rocks, I don't know, they look like they're probably 3 foot in diameter or so. I kind of floated up against them, and I reached down to push off of one, and it was like a big gob of razor blades or something. Everything about all of the edges on that thing was super sharp. Nothing to play around. You don't want your boat banging up against that. You could easily pop a hole in your boat.
And you don't want to have to get out and crawl over that either.
Heck no. And one of the things, too, we were talking about things that we loved. One of my favorite experiences there was getting to see the dolphins, and there were so many dolphins in the harbor. I'd seen them at a distance before on a cruise ship, so you're looking way down and off at a distance, but these things were right up next to us so many different times, huge pods of dolphins just everywhere. I thought that was so cool.
It is. It's one of my favorite parts of the trip is you're paddling out there in the water. I mean, your elbows are literally 3 inches off the water, and here you see a dolphin cresting or a family of them just playing, and it's almost like when they're out there with you, you just feel safe.
Yeah. You and I actually had a conversation about that. You've obviously got sharks and other big things out there that could swallow you whole. But dolphins are your friends. They'll keep you safe. They're not afraid of the sharks. They'll run them off. So that was magical and reassuring when you see all these dolphins there. It made me feel safe, even though I was like this little dot on the the map of that harbor.
Exactly. And everybody knows I love turtles, but out in the water like that, dolphins are your only friend.
So true, man. I'll tell you, while we're talking about cool experiences, cool and exhilarating was when you and I were paddling up what I have now dubbed Gator Alley. And I'd been dying to see an alligator. I spotted one off at a distance, but, it disappeared as soon as I saw it. Didn't get a picture. And then I literally, probably 30 seconds after saying this looks like gator territory, a huge gator just slides down out of the weeds right beside us.
I'll have to say, Gary, I thought it was just a long day and the visions were coming. I was looking at the water and here it comes tromping through the weeds. And when the weeds moved, I saw it and we both kind of put paddle in the water and took a stroke forward.
Yeah, that was exciting. It was scary. I'll never forget it. And the other part was we were literally at the end of the day trying to find a camp spot and we're like, okay, we're almost there. Boom, there's a gator. No, not camping there.
Speaking of that area, the last year the guys were there at low tide and they were able to find camp right near where we were. This year, Charleston has experienced a lot of flooding, so it put mud up the hills 5 foot, and there was no option.
Yeah.
So that's something in the future, to be planned for, because you don't want to be in the marsh when you have to crawl up 5 foot of mud to get to your camp.
Yeah. That's for sure. It didn't hurt my feelings, though, that camp failed on us. After seeing a gator, I had no desire to sleep there. I don't know that I would have slept.
I can't say if I would have slept, it would have been by choice. It would have just been my eyes shutting.
Yeah. The whole time we were paddling in and out of that little channel, I kept thinking, my God, like you said earlier, our elbows are 3 inches from the water. This channel at times was no more than 10 or 15 feet wide. When we got up there to turn around, here we are in 14 and 15 foot boats. It was almost impossible to turn around. I was nervous the whole time.
If it wasn't for that one cutout that we did turn around in, I think we would have been paddling out of it backwards.
Yeah. And I was totally prepared to do that.
And the way the gator came out, it was kind of scary when you're back up in there, because by the time you'd have seen it, it would have had its head on your boat. Yeah,
without a doubt. So for me, this trip was challenging mentally and challenging physically. Mentally, it's hard to prepare for something like this, but physically you can. What would you recommend to somebody that decides they want to do one of these epic, 100+ mile paddle trips where you're literally, it's like sitting down on a rowing machine for 8 to 10 hours every day for, a week?
It is. And the one misconception that people have is they think in training for a big trip like this, you need to go out and paddle really hard for a long time, a lot of days. And that's not true. You want to break it up into, our trip was 7 days of paddling. So you want to get to where you can consistently every day go out and paddle at the speed you want to paddle for an hour. Anything over that, you can start damaging your body for the actual long trip. So it's basically done in training hours. You want to go out, if you want to average 4 miles an hour, go out on a nice lake or a nice river for an hour a day and paddle at 4 miles an hour. And that will condition your body to be able to handle that for a long distance trip like this.
That's a really good point about not overtraining, just making sure that you're paddling correctly, which brings me to my next question and a very valuable lesson that I learned. On the first couple days, you were teaching me about proper technique. And then when we picked up Raul, he taught me about posture. Let's talk a little bit about that, because if you have good technique and good posture, you can paddle and go through the water so much more efficiently. How would you recommend somebody start practicing? What's a beginner need to know about technique and posture?
Well, it goes back to what we were taught as a kids, to sit up straight with your back straight and use your core and not one particular part of your body. Use the whole core. Tighten your stomach muscles. It never crossed my mind to tell you to tighten your stomach muscles because I do it naturally. I thought it was everybody just did it naturally. When Raul said that, it clicked into me about the conversation you and I had the day before when I was like, if your back hurts, I don't know what to tell you, because I was already flexing my stomach muscles. So I didn't think to say, flex your stomach muscles, but not everybody, sits the same way. Mm-hmm. So technique is just, you want a nice fluid motion. You don't want to be fighting the water all day. There's so many different styles to paddle, so many different ways you can handle your paddle. If you don't have someone to teach you, the best thing I could recommend would be just to get on some flat water and really pay attention to where your hands are on the paddle. I like mine a little more shoulder width apart, just so I have more control at the end of the paddle. I see a lot of people try to grab the middle of the paddle, and I mean, that's really like the wrong physics of it. You have no control of that paddle if you're grabbing it in the middle. So therefore, in order to push it through the water, you're expending a lot of energy versus grabbing it down closer to the actual blade of the paddle and just easily pushing it. Because y'all may not have noticed, I generally only have 2 to 3 fingers firmly on the paddle at any given time, unless I'm really trying to force forward. It's a nice fluid motion that you want to be able to go at a nice smooth pace with as little effort as you can.
Something that you told me while we were out there that I started doing ever so often that helped me with my technique was closing my eyes and feeling what's going on. I would get the paddle position correctly, get my hands spaced apart correctly, and then I would feel what was happening. Now, obviously, that's impossible to do on, choppy water or something like that. But when we were on these smooth sections of the river or the edges of the lake, I was able to do that, and I could feel what was happening. And I found that, if I had this proper technique where I was making every paddle long and intentional versus just short and choppy and trying to, just grab at the water, I could move so much more effectively.
And it's true. We can see, hear, smell, touch. If you shut one of those senses down, your brain is going to start hyper focusing on the ones that are left open.
Right.
If you close your eyes, something that you need to physically perfect, like you said, you're no longer distracted by what's in your vision or trying to play out what you think the math is on something, and your body is just doing what it feels naturally it knows it needs to do. And you feel restraint. You feel when you get a release. You feel when the wave comes at you and where you paddle on it. I'm not saying, like you said, don't go out there and try to paddle 5 or 10 miles with your eyes closed. It may not end well for you. But I would definitely, when you get a chance, just get relaxed and don't even try to paddle in the beginning. Just get relaxed and close your eyes and become one with your boat on that water. And you'll find that you may still need a few little techniques shown to you, and you may need a little bit of advice, but overall, the human body kind of knows what feels right and what is being productive and what isn't.
That's a good point. I found that when I just relaxed and I guess to a degree stopped trying to think about it so much and just relax, and this sounds very woo-woo, but become one with the boat and one with the water, and everything just seems to fall in place.
Well, you have to, and you have to become one with the boat, and you have to become one with the water. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting it.
Yeah.
And that's somewhere you really want to be. You don't want to fight the water off the boat. I
promise you, to anybody that's listening, if you try to fight it, you will lose. That boat and that water will own you.
They will, even if you handle it for a little while. Eventually, it's going to wear on your. You want to exert the least amount of effort and be the most productive you can. It's not about. We're not sprinting anywhere. We're not trying to win a strongman contest. We're trying to go 160 miles and still be physically fit when we get there.
So talking about the becoming one with the boat, something you taught me early on was proper position of my legs. Most people think that this is an arm workout, but while it definitely attacks your arms and your whole upper body, getting your legs locked in properly inside that boat helps you become one with it. And it's one of those things you'll sort of know it when you get in there because you'll feel it. And then every slight move that you makes that boat move. So you literally your lower body becomes the boat, not legs.
It's true. And that's the reason that foot pegs are in a lot of boats. And even in your sit on tops, they have molded foot places and they're adjustable so you can get them where you need them, is because if you're not using your legs to help support you, then your upper body is doing all of that. You're going to support yourself one way or the other, whether you're forcing your core to do it or whether you let your legs do it. And to me, you lock yourself in the boat. I mean, it's not really to me, it's science. You lock yourself in the boat to where when you move your hips, that boat moves with your hips. Now you never have to overcome the momentum of the boat going against what you want it to do because it is you.
I found that when you get those legs locked in and you're sort of flexing your core muscles and sitting up straight, then you start focusing on that paddle with the rotation of your body. So you're not just paddling with your arms. Once I got all of those pieces of this puzzle put together, I was amazed. I was able to keep up with you because prior to that, dude, you were smoking me and I just couldn't keep up. There was that second day that you even asked me, it's like, dude, are you just back here being lazy? It's like, no, I mean, the second day was the hardest day for me because every mistake that I was making culminated into just a tough morning.
It does, and that's the thing. Getting into a good fluid motion is key. If you want to take a break, try to get up to a top speed and then take the paddle out the water and float to a lower speed. Every time we have to start the boats, I mean, that is just raw power you're exerting. Proper technique, proper posture, all that plays a big part of, and keeping the boat straight with the current. The last thing you want to do is keep having to move the front of the boat over to get your line. Every time you do that, you're wasting that energy.
That brings me to something I wanted to touch on. So in boat selection and boat features, you had told me for something like this, you don't want a short boat. You want a long boat. The longer the boat, the faster the boat. But also, too, having a rudder or a skeg. I didn't know what a skeg was until we started this. I knew what a rudder was, but I'd never really paid attention to one on a kayak. And for me, I had a rudder that didn't work because I bought a cheap knockoff and tried to make it work. It failed on me, which made it really difficult for me to keep it in a straight line. Talk a little bit about what a rudder and a skeg is and what it can do for you, especially on a trip like this.
Well, first off, let me say that most kayakers you talk to that are big into whitewater and stuff, you have to know the boater you're talking to. They'll suggest a skeg because they help in the open currents, but they're used to a boat that'll spin circles. So them staying anywhat straight is a good day for them. Me, I like a rudder. A rudder, I can control where the boat's going with my feet and not have to use my upper body to do that. In the currents across the lakes and the wind in the harbor especially, you can kind of push one foot forward a little bit, get the rudder angled where it needs to go, and you can just paddle freely straight. If you get off a little bit, push it with your feet and you're not double paddling on one side or braking on the other or a special S stroke or J stroke to stay straight. The skeg is great in the currents because it'll kind of keep you in a consistent place versus the back of the boat's rounded. It really has nothing in the water to push against. So the skeg will drop down and give the water something to hit and kind of keep you at a constant pace. I've never really used a boat with a skeg. I went from a flat bottom boat to the rudder, and I'm going to have to say, I did paddle. I will say this. I paddled a lot of this trip. I pulled my rudder up just because nobody else had one, and I kind of wanted it to be more.
I appreciate that.
But when I took it up, I could noticeably tell a difference in the way the back of the boat was was kind of fishtailing, just getting squirrely. Put the rudder back down, and now all I have to do is focus on my forward strokes. So I would suggest if you're doing long paddle, get a boat with a nice rudder. If you're playing in the water periodically for the day or something, you can get away with a skeg. And a lot of people, y'all did it. You did it. You did the boat with nothing back there. But my suggestion is if you can get a foot operated pedal rudder that can save you a lot of actual strokes and core strength, get it. This is a long trip. I mean, if you kill yourself on the first day, your energy level, you got 6 more days to try to get that back and produce again. It's not easy.
No, it's definitely not easy. There was plenty of times, especially in that harbor and on Lake Moultrie, where the wind would get you in one angle, and as hard as I would try, I could paddle to my butt off on one side and could not turn that boat around. And the last thing I wanted to do was reverse paddle on the other side because that was going to slow me down. I would have killed for a good rudder or a skeg on either one of those situations because I just could not keep it in a perfectly straight line.
Well, speaking of kill, that's something that I don't like to show, paddlers without a lot of experience, because if you get to focusing on that, then you're going to not worry so much about your paddle technique. And if you overdo it, you will end up with a swamped boat. But you can lean your weight, your core weight to the side you want to turn and kind of keep your upper body leaned back over center line of the boat.
Yep.
And turning like that becomes a lot easier because you're putting the boat on its side, and that can save a lot of energy that you're expending and muscle to try to turn a flat boat just sitting in the water flat versus turning on its side, and comparatively they'll turn on a dime than not doing it. But it's something that you really have to feel used to. You have to, again, become one with your boat. You have to be locked into your boat in order to do that with your lower body. But when you're out there, and we're battling some decent weather and swells and stuff, that's not something I really want to go into with boaters, because if you're focusing on that and the swell hits you and you're leaning that way, if you're not prepared to lean the other way, you're going to flip over.
Yes.
So sometimes it's just easier to let people learn one thing and then move on to the next versus overloading them.
So in addition to being able to control the boat with proper technique and posture, you also need to know how to read the water. We went through all types of different scenarios on this trip, from rivers to lakes to the harbor. You had told me a few different things, and one of the first things that you told me that I found interesting was follow the bubbles. I've spent countless years. I don't have a memory where I didn't have a canoe available to me, and I'd never heard follow the bubbles, but I'd also only used a kayak for fishing, or the canoe for fishing. So I was just doing short little, spots here and there. And I really didn't care about, reading the water other than trying to read where the fish would be. What do you mean by follow the bubbles?
Well, for instance, last year we camped at a spot we call hog camp. So we camped right on a hog trail, unfortunately. I mean, it was, but I'm not taking a group there again.
No.
But the next morning we went around almost a 90-degree bend in the river, and the water was coming straight at us. And the other guys were like, "How did you get through the wind so easily?" I said, "Well, you didn't see the line of bubbles and kind of clear water that snaked right up the middle? And the bubbles are going to go in path of least resistance. They're going to go wherever they can freely go. Well, if they're freely going somewhere, then you're going to want to follow those bubbles. If you come across a little windy spot that the whole top of the water is kind of distorted with a small little chop due to the wind, and you see a flat line somewhere, well, that line, for some reason or the other, is not getting affected by that wind, because that is your path of least resistance, if it's a headwind. If it's a tailwind, I guess
do the opposite.
You're good to go. I wouldn't go in the flat line. I would go with the wind.
Yeah.
But when you have a headwind and you see a flat spot in the water, and that goes, a lot of people see them and they not understand what they are. That's the water either still or freely moving in a direction the wind is going opposite. So that's just going to equate to least resistance, easiest path.
And it's funny you talk about that out there on the river, but I also found even in the choppy water on Lake Moultrie, the swells, the way they would collide into themselves would create a line of bubbles that you could see was going against the swells. And it was hard to stay in that line, especially me not having a rudder or a skeg. But if I could do that, I could actually tell a slight improvement in how I was moving forward.
And that's every little slight improvement you can make adds up to be a good bit easier on the trip. Again, I have found, and I don't know if there's any science behind it, I'm not a scientist, but I have noticed on these rivers and on lakes, follow the bubbles.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. I saw it and experienced it. It made a big difference for me. Another thing, I'd always noticed when I was fishing, it was easy to tell where the channel was at, the deeper part, because one side of the bank would be smooth and sloped, and then the other one would be sort of chopped off. And, the chopped off side is where the channel tended to be. And that was how you looked for the current. I never worried about it. I was always worried about it from a fishing standpoint, but now I know always stay on that outside of the bends when you're kayaking, because it's going to help you, again, just that ever so slight improvement in your paddling. You can get that current working for you.
It is. And I've tried to do some analysis of how much faster you go through a bend if you're on the outside versus the inside. And to be honest, some of them, when you go to the inside, you may get across it faster, but I'll guarantee you're way more tired than when I get there.
Right.
Because I stayed in solid water.
Just to clarify for our listeners, every one of these things are just sort of a loose rule of thumb, because just because the channel might be on the outside, if the wind is going to cause a problem over there, you need to switch it up. If the bubbles and the smooth spots are not on the outside of the channel, follow the bubbles. Everything is up for interpretation.
That's very true. And each bend poses its own little different environment, whether the beach slopes way out into the water and only a foot deep for 10 or 15 foot out there, or whether it drops off.
Yep.
If you have a really inside, you basically, you're going to shoot all the way to the inside and then go straight across to the outside off the inside, because that's the way the water's going. You can look at the landscape and pretty much start to learn what the water is going to do.
Well, before we wrap this thing up, I'm just curious, is there anything that you learned from this trip, now that you've done it from beginning to end, that you would take away and make sure that you did next time, and like a little piece of wisdom that you would want to pass on to anybody that's thinking about trying this trip or another one like it?
Don't do it in a two-person canoe. But in all seriousness, no, last year we were all pretty much the same strength of paddlers. A couple of those guys were new. Another one had been on some distance trips before, but we could pretty much all keep up with each other, I guess. And this year it really dawned on me with the different experience levels. We all had rudders or skegs last year, pretty nice boats. It really dawned on me that this is a group trip, and you are only as strong as your slowest, most inexperienced paddler. Now, granted, the more experienced guys are going to get to rest a little more, but still, as a group, you're only as strong as the slowest guy. And it's best to sometimes stay back and go a little slower than you'd want, just to keep their morale up. Because this trip, I might have been in the front a lot, but on other trips, I have been in the back a lot. And it really makes a difference in your mentality if you can never get closer to the person in front of you.
Yeah, that's very true. Those first couple days, it was tough, because I felt like, I'm giving it all I've got, and why can't I keep up? Now, granted, I learned a lot about, the paddling technique and posture, and then I could do it. But, in the beginning, I don't know that I've ever felt so inexperienced at something that I should know how to do. With all of the years I spent in a canoe, it was very valuable that I had done that before. So my learning curve was probably a lot less than a lot of people. But those first 2 days, I really felt like the biggest noob on the water.
Well, it's a lot like running. When we learn to run, kids just go wide open, legs flailing everywhere, and they're just full of energy and running. And then we show them how to tone their technique down, and now they can put that effort and energy into proper technique. And what do? Go a lot faster across the land. It's the same thing. You're going to use a lot of energy. Where you use it is up to you.
Well, Scott, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. I'm sure listeners will get a lot out of this, and I hope to join you again on this trip next year, and maybe we can pull some of these Inside the Outside listeners out there on the water with us.
Let's do it, man. We look forward to having you with us next year. My one piece of advice that you take from this is grab a boat, get out on the water, and enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Inside the Outside is proudly brought to you by Terrapin Outfitters. Terrapin Outfitters is an innovative company that specializes in developing clothing and gear that enhance people's enjoyment of outdoor activities. Check them out at terrapinoutfitters.com.
And follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Look for the handle Inside the Outside Show.
For links to our social media and other stuff that we talk about in the show, be sure to check out the show notes and our website, InsideTheOutsideShow.com.